So you think I'm leaving Moscow, he demanded. Yes, sire. That is not certain. Nowhere shall I be better off than in Moscow. The hardships of winter, the total lack of all precautions against cold and so forth did not enter into his calculations. You do not know the French, he said to me. They will get all they need. One thing will replace another. The extreme rigors of winter do not come in 24 hours. Although we are less acclimatized than the Russians, we are fundamentally more robust. We have not had autumn yet. We shall have plenty of fine days before winter sets in. Do not trust to that, sire, I answered. Winter will come like a bombshell, and you cannot be too apprehensive, considering the present state of the army. This conversation shows all too clearly the emperor's hopes, desires, and wishes. It would be superfluous to add further details. In the event of not meeting with the success he anticipated in his attack on Kutuzov, the emperor considered himself in a fit state to keep the field and imagined that the temperature would allow him to do so for some time yet. He intended to make no movement without having previously beaten Kutuzov, but should he decide to retire on Vitebsk, he wanted at the same time to arrange everything in Moscow so that if necessary, the winter could be passed there, and so that he could retain the means of keeping the place if he decided to hold that line. In the event of a withdrawal, he considered that he would have time and the means to withdraw the Moscow garrison when he wished to do so. Such was the reasoning upon which the emperor based his conduct and his prolonged stay in Moscow, waiting for a reply which never came and could never come. Since October 3rd, our troops had been ordered to concentrate, and on the 15th or 16th, the emperor seemed inclined to evacuate Moscow and move his headquarters to Vitebsk, keeping Smolensk as an advanced post or perhaps as headquarters if he did not deem it necessary to establish himself at Vitebsk to be near the Dwina. He complained more bitterly than ever that the King of Naples was losing his cavalry. On the evening of the 14th, he had ordered him to make ready for a possible attack on Kutuzov, and relying on details the king had supplied as to the state of the cavalry, daily losses, and the difficulty of finding provisions, had authorized him to take up his position at Voronovo for the time being, as he would be there covered by infantry. But the tacit armistice, which had existed for some days, made the king decide to stay where he was. Meanwhile, the emperor once again sent Lauriston to Russian headquarters to propose an armistice and to ascertain whether any reply had come from Petersburg. The King of Naples was instructed to forward Lauriston's dispatches as rapidly as possible, for the emperor awaited them with all the more impatience because he realized that the season was passing. The Prince of Neuchatel wrote in this sense to Kutuzov on the 16th, urging him to make war in such a way as to keep the country in hand rather than devastate it. He proposed certain measures to this end. On the 21st, after his success at Voronovo, Marshal Kutuzov replied, "A people that has not seen an enemy on its soil for 3 centuries is enabled to make the distinction which frequent occupations and familiarity with the customs of modern warfare have established in civilized nations." The emperor considered this a worthy reply, and after reading it, observed, "These people have no wish to treat for terms. Kutuzov is courteous because he wants to finish the war, but Alexander has no such desire. He is pig-headed." The King of Naples had already proposed this armistice desired by the Russian generals, and only refused by them because the Tsar had not authorized it. It was on this occasion that the Tsar remarked, on receiving the dispatches and proposals from headquarters, "Now is the moment when my campaign opens." Some day later, after the affair at Voronovo, it was learned from the Russians that the Tsar had expressly forbidden the marshal and his generals to consent to any armistice or cessation of hostilities. Lauriston came back on the 17th, while Kutuzov was preparing for the next day the surprise which was to disillusion everyone so cruelly. At this time, while searching for food and wine, some soldiers discovered cellars in which a prodigious quantity of furs had been concealed, and all who could afford it bought them. The bear skins were too costly for junior officers, but I purchased one for a few Napoleons. By October 18th, everything was ready to move on Kaluga on the 20th. The emperor had decided to leave part of his household at Moscow and had given me orders to that effect. At 1 in the afternoon, as he was holding a review of Ney's corps after the parade, he received news of the King of Naples' defeat at Vincovo. The emperor decided on the spot to hasten his own movements and advance everything by a day. The entire household and all his carriages were ordered to start, and even as many of the sick as could be moved. The emperor's first words to the Prince of Neuchâtel and to those to whom he issued orders in person were, "We must wipe out the effects of this surprise. It must not be said in France that a check like this has forced us to retire. What folly of a king! No one takes proper care. This upsets all our plans. It spoils everything. The honor of our arms must be reestablished on the battlefield. We will see if the Russians carry matters off there as they did in this surprise. Anyhow, it looks as if the king has done them some damage, for they dare not follow him. In any event, we must march to his help and avenge him." The king had lost several pieces of artillery. A number of excellent and gallant officers had been killed, others captured and many wounded. He lost also a number of his prisoners and the greater part of his own carriages and those of his army corps. The king had carried out his retreat in good order and without annoyance from the Russians, of whom only a few corps had crossed the Chernichichina. Kutuzov had only intended this skirmish to be an affair between outposts, a snatched advantage. He contented himself with this small success and did not trouble to risk the advantage he had gained. Unwilling to run the hazards of a battle, he halted, resumed his position on the Nara, and left only Platov, supported by some regular troops, to pursue the King of Naples. With soldiers of different caliber serving under a different chief, few of our men would have escaped. Prodigies of valor were performed. The emperor blamed the king, and especially General Sebastiani, who had suffered the surprise, for not having sent outposts or continual patrols into the small wood that dominated the position at General Sebastiani's right, for it was from this position that the Russians, more alert and active than ourselves on this occasion, were able, as the emperor said, to observe all of Sebastiani's movements, even to what went on in his own quarters. The emperor was all the more displeased that he should have to blame his generals for having been taken by surprise, because this same plan had been attacked by the Cossacks early in October, and from the same wood. This, he considered, should not have escaped the notice of those in command. The emperor did not fail to reproach himself for having stayed in Moscow without inspecting this position. "It means that I must see everything with my own eyes," he said. "I cannot rely upon the king. He trusts in his own bravery. He leaves things to his generals, and they are careless. The king performs prodigies of valor. Without his presence of mind and courage, everything would have been lost, and he himself jeopardized. Had the Russians been better led? If this surprise attack was proof of our lack of watchfulness, the way we fought, although far fewer numbers, must have shown the Russians the fatigue and privations had by no means diminished our courage. The entire success of the enemy was attributed to the Cossacks, whose activity engaged only too much of our attention. Our men were doubtless very brave, but they were careless and lacking in vigilance, which arose as much from their character as from lack of order and discipline. This was frequently the subject of serious reflection on the part of the Prince of Neuchâtel and other generals about the emperor. There were too many young officers in the corps. Dashing courage was valued above all else. Method, foresight, and even a love of discipline were underestimated. At all his reviews, the emperor made everything of audacity, courage, and luck.